Hey, everybody, and welcome back to For the Booze.
For the Booze.
Hey. How's everybody doing? How's it going?
I always wait to see if they're going to answer.
Hello? Anybody there?
They're not going to answer. But we're back once again to cast some spells on people.
Ooh.
Maybe some voodoo dolls. Because this is a weird episode. This is a very weird episode that is going to turn into a two-parter.
Yes. We haven't done one of those in a while.
There is a definite connection to today's story. And I actually didn't plan that out. It's just the way it turned out. So
nice.
So yeah, we're going to get spooky with this one. I probably should have saved this one actually for like Halloween or something. But we are going to go over to the East Coast, to the Southlands, as you will. And we are going to visit a pretty famous location. Now, before we tell you what it is, I have to say, I've never really had to say this before. This is the first time that I'm not 100% on what I have written.
Okay.
And that is not due to lack of trying, because I read more stuff for this episode than I have for any other episode we've ever done. The problem is...
That's saying something, too.
is that all of this takes place in a location and in a time and period where records were not very well kept. And most of the stuff that you're going to hear about is word of mouth. It's stories that have been passed down. I mean, the person is factual. The home is factual that we're doing. But a lot of the stuff differs depending on where you read it.
Okay.
So I went to what I deem as what I would consider a trustworthy, places to get the information. But I have to throw that out there in case somebody's like, well, I know the story, and that's not how it goes.
Right.
I don't think anybody truly knows how the story goes, to be honest with you, because depending on where you read, sometimes the person isn't even the same person. Sometimes the location is different. Sometimes, the whole circumstances for what the story revolves around is different. So I just needed to throw that out there. I got it as good as I could get.
Okay.
So,
well, I'm excited.
If you're out there and you do know the story and you have a different version of it, hit me up. I'd like to hear it. I'm interested in all angles of this. So I have to throw that out there because I take a lot of pride in the fact that, I try to do everything as factual as possible.
Of course, especially history parts and things like that,
Yes.
All of it, really.
I mean, stories are usually stories, but especially the history part, I try to get as close as I can, but this one was very hard.
Yeah.
But this week we are going to travel, like I said, to the south, and we are going to go over to the spookiest of spooky swamplands, and we're going to head over to Louisiana.
Oh.
Go down to the French Creole, some alligators and whatnot. And we are going
Give me some of that crawfish.
We are going, man.
So good.
Can you get crawfish? I don't even know if you can get crawfish out here.
Probably not.
And we are going to go to
the house of the Voodoo Queen, Marie Laveau.
That's right. The Voodoo Queen of New Orleans.
Yeah.
And she is a very well-known historical figure because she does hold the title as Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. And I mean, when people think of New Orleans and Louisiana, a lot of people associate voodoo culture
absolutely
with that area.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're going to do today. And I say we jump into this because this is I'm pretty excited for this. This was one that I wasn't sure about, and once I started going, I was like, this is a very interesting story.
Yay, I'm so excited.
So
I am definitely looking forward to this one.
It's going to get wild. So here we go. Voodoo, as a religious system, is derived from spiritual practices from Dahomey, the historic Western African kingdom. Voodoo is actually a fallen word that means spirit or deity. Voodoo was transported to the United States during the transatlantic slave trade. African religion was brought to New Orleans first by the initial group of enslaved Africans from West Africa. After the revolution of Santo Domingo, another wave of African people brought their religion to New Orleans. The Voodoo tradition was strengthened and reinforced by the free and enslaved African community of New Orleans. It is important to note that the practice of Voodoo in New Orleans is not the purest manifestation of Voodoo as it was known in Dahomey. Also, it's not the same religious system that is observed in Haiti. Santo Domingo was isolated, and religious and cultural practices were maintained and sustained. However, in New Orleans, Voodooists had to adhere to strict European laws, codes, and oppression associated with enslavement. Voodoo was often under scrutiny by public officials and the law. Nonetheless, Voodoo held a strong presence in New Orleans throughout the centuries, and Voodoo ceremonies and activities took place at various sites around the city. Voodoo in New Orleans consisted of root work or gris or juju. People would seek out conjurers or other spiritualists for spiritual intervention or protection in their daily affairs. These favors ranged from those concerning love to political influence. Although most workers used their powers for positive forces, there were some who did not. It was probably the work of this small percentage of people that was sensationalized by people outside of the religion. This aspect of the religion became known as hoodoo, and is often the basis for misconceptions that public society has about voodoo. Historical records state that Marie Laveau was born a free woman of color in New Orleans, today the French Quarter, Louisiana, Thursday, September 10th, 1801. At the time of her birth, Louisiana was still administered by Spanish colonial officials. Her mother, Marguerite d'Arcantel, was a free woman of color of African, European, and Native American ancestry. Because Laveau's mother was not married at the time of her birth, her father was not identified on her 1801 baptismal record. This is where I want to interject with another statement. Depending on where you get your information, the date of her birth is also going to differ from site to site. Now, a possible candidate is Charles Laveau, the son of Charles Laveau Trudeau, a white Louisiana Creole and politician. Other historians claim that Laveau's father was a free man of color named Charles Laveau with an X. Much of the confusion is due to inconsistent spellings and surviving records. On August 4th, 1819, she married Jacques Paris, also known as Jacques Santiago in Spanish records, a quadroon, free man of color who had fled as a refugee from the Haitian Revolution in the former French colony, Santo Domingo. Their marriage certificate is preserved in the St. Louis Cathedral in New Orleans. The wedding mass was performed by Father Antonio de Sadella, the Capuchin priest known as Père Antoine. Jacques was part of a large white and Creole of color immigration of refugees to New Orleans in 1809 after the Haitian Revolution. Now, they had two daughters, Felicity in 1817 and Angela in 1820. Both disappear from records in the 1820s. Jacques Santiago Paris worked as a carpenter. Marie Laveau's home once stood on the site of present-day 1020 and 1022 St. Anne Street. Marguerite d'Arcantel, Laveau's mother, and Catherine Henry, Laveau's grandmother, raised Marie Laveau at the property. Marie Laveau went on to raise her own family in the same house and often opened the building up to those in need. Now, the story of how Marie Laveau obtained her house is an example of how myth often supersedes fact. Many attribute Laveau's home ownership to her voodoo abilities. According to one legend, a wealthy man petitioned Laveau for help. The man's son was accused of murder, and lawyers said the case was hopeless. The man asked Laveau for his son's freedom, and in payment, he would grant Laveau a house on St. Anne Street. In preparation for the trial, Laveau spent weeks praying to voodoo loa, spirits, and Catholic saints in St. Louis Cathedral. While in prayer, Laveau held guinea peppers, which are extremely spicy, in her mouth. When the spirits saw this willingness to suffer, they heard her intention. And on the morning of the trial, Laveau placed the guinea peppers under the judge's seat. The man's son was proclaimed innocent, and Marie gained the house on St. Anne. Now, Laveau's actual acquisition of the house is a less thrilling tale. The cottage on St. Anne Street was built for Catherine Henry, Marie Laveau's grandmother, sometime after she purchased the lot in 1798. After Catherine Henry's death, the legal heirs to the cottage, consisting of Marie Laveau and her cousins, decided to sell the cottage to pay their grandmother's expenses. Jean-Louis Christophe Dumony de Glapion, Laveau's common-law husband, then purchased the property. Jean Glapion came from a prominent New Orleans family. He was white, and the law deemed interracial marriages illegal. In order to circumnavigate these laws, Glapion deeded the cottage to their minor children that he and Marie produced, giving everyone in the family the legal right to live there. At times, Glapion claimed he was of mixed race. He and Laveau had several children together: Marie Heloise Eucharist, Marie Louise, Christophe, Jean-Baptiste, François Maurice, Marie Philomene, and Archange Edouard. Only Marie Heloise and Marie Philomene lived to adulthood, both of whom produced children who were also raised in St. Anne Cottage. Laveau became a, quote, hairdresser to create economic stability for herself and her family. Through interaction with her black clients who were house servants, she was exposed to personal information about her wealthy white clients who often sought her counsel. Laveau used this information to give informed counsel to the people who sought advice from her concerning their personal affairs. Many wealthy and politically affluent individuals, both white and black, paid Laveau for her personal advice, intervention in some situation, and protection against any evil energy that might have been placed against them. As she quickly became known as the Queen of Voodoo, Laveau predominantly orchestrated rituals at three main sites: her home on St. Anne Street, Congo Square, and Lake Pontchartrain. At her home on St. Anne Street, Laveau would converse with clients who would meet with her regarding any issues they were having. In her backyard, she would also have ceremonies that conjured the spirits of the Great Zombie, the deity Dambala Widu, who would manifest through a snake. The second major ritualistic space, Congo Square, was a public square that was set aside by city officials as a gathering space for both enslaved and free African people. Laveau would gather her followers here on Sundays to dance and worship. No major ceremonies would take place here, but it was a place of spiritual gathering and rejuvenation for Africans who experienced major oppression and hardships both on the plantation and as free citizens. The last place of significance that was presided over by Laveau was on the shore of Lake Pontchartrain. It was here that major ceremonies took place among the initiated in the religion. Laveau would often be accompanied by her, quote, king, or second-ranking male officiate. Singing, dancing, drumming, and spirit possession would occur in these gatherings. Curious white people would often sneak into the woods to witness these ceremonies. For sensationalism, They would often report extreme tales of what they had witnessed. There were often rivalries over who should rule the voodoo system in New Orleans. Before Laveau took reign, there were two women who preceded her as queen. The first was Sanette Dede, who ruled for several years before she was usurped by Marie Laveau, who introduced Laveau to the intricacies of the religion and provided her with her fundamental tutelage. After taking a prominent stance as voodoo queen, Laveau reigned unchallenged until 1850, when another Creole woman named Rosalie attempted to challenge Laveau's position. To create an aura of fear and awe, Rosalie placed a huge life-sized wooden doll in her yard that was said to have been imported from Africa. The statue was covered with beads and intricate carvings. When people in the voodoo community began expressing fear and respect for Rosalie because of the doll, Laveau stole the statue. She was taken to court by Rosalie, but used her persuasive powers and influence to have the doll permanently removed. Not only her base of operation, and where she raised her children, her home was also a safe haven for many in need. Journalists recorded the house to be simple, but elaborate altars decorated the interior. People interviewed by the WPA Federal Writers Project mentioned altars with statues of saints, animal parts, and effigies in Laveau's cottage. The WPA interviewees also mentioned how Laveau opened her home to orphans and allowed Choctaw vendors to shelter there. Like many Creole women in New Orleans, the home was the center of Laveau's life. The cottage at St. Anne was an ancestral home where Laveau's grandmother defied a patriarchal and racist society by buying her own home and raising her family. Laveau even went on to raise her own family here too. Glapion, their children, and Laveau herself passed away in this home. The cottage was demolished in 1903, and the current structure at 1020 St. Anne's marks the approximate location of her home. After Laveau's death in 1881, voodoo in New Orleans lost a great deal of its adherents. As more people began assimilating economically and socially, the need to depend on the ancient rites and traditions of the old-time religion decreased. Voodoo began taking on new forms, becoming incorporated into other religions. Today, Laveau is buried in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Each year, thousands of visitors flock to her tomb and adorn her plot with spiritual regalia, candles, money, flowers, and assorted personal items. But did Marie Laveau really leave the spot where her home once stood? Or maybe something left over from her practices still linger there? With so many rivals, maybe it's possible there's something dark still lurking in wait for those who visit the beloved voodoo queen of New Orleans.
Ooh, that was a lot. And a lot that I didn't know. I feel like this, I don't know, the voodoo thing is just very fascinating to me.
Well, the very complex thing about Marie Laveau was not only was she the voodoo queen, but she was also very much into God.
Yeah.
Very much into God. She would attend like Christian services, Catholic services. She would volunteer at the church's hospitals and go in and try to give people hope.
Wow.
But she also incorporated her birthright of the voodoo religion, and she mixed them. Which is
pretty cool, actually.
Which is what makes the New Orleans voodoo so much different from other aspects of it, because it's not a pure form, but it ended up being something completely different. Now, I have to say, though, I've read things that change her birth year by 20 years.
What?
And change her death year by 20 years. There are stories where it's not her. I'm not going to say who it is because it's in your story. But there's so many things that differ story to story. And I actually think it helps to add to the mystique of who Marie Laveau is, because what better way to be the voodoo queen of New Orleans to say, we don't even know what really happened here.
Right.
There's so much mystery.
So shrouded in mystery.
There's so much.
Yeah.
She is just such an enigmatic character. And there's just so little while there's at the same time so much.
Right.
That is, it's really interesting. And today, her home is it's not her home anymore, but a house was built there that is now a voodoo shop.
So cool. What?
Yes.
What?
Marie Laveau is a very interesting character. If you look her up, her story is super weird. Super weird, I guess, to the rest of us, because unless you're practicing, part of the voodoo religion, it's just very different.
Wow. That's super neat. Super, super cool.
So we're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we're going to get in on the spooky stuff.
All right. And now, Booze Crew, back to the show. In 1974, a live recording titled Marie Laveau, sung by country singer Bobby Bare and written by Shel Silverstein and Baxter Taylor, made it to the top spot of the U.S. Billboard Hot Country Singles. Nearly 40 years later, Marie Laveau was again thrust into the mainstream American pop culture with the success of American Horror Story Coven. Even though the series was plagued with historical inaccuracies, such as the non-existent relationship between Laveau and Mad Madame Delphine LaLaurie, in the end, it was good business, something Marie Laveau surely would have appreciated. A long-standing rumor, perpetuated by many tour guides to this day in New Orleans, is that Marie was a hairdresser, despite the fact that there is no archival evidence that she ever was. Perhaps the explanation for this rumor is simplistic in nature. Some believe it's a cover story used by some of the elite women on Marie's large client list, who may have been concerned about associating with a scandalizing voodoo priestess. Regardless, Marie would go to their homes to perform her tasks. While there, she would earn favor with the slaves by giving them charms, prayers, and even spells. In return, the slaves would tell Marie secrets about their masters, in which Marie used her information to captivate her clients with the incredible insights that the spirits shared with her. She, of course, was always willing to help with any issues, for a fee, of course. With her unique blending of voodoo rituals and Catholicism, it did not take long before Marie Laveau became known throughout the city as the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. This house is described as being a relatively unassuming house by today's standards, but was considered a lovely rebuilt home in 1903. It is a handsome little house and fits in well with surrounding homes, full of New Orleans charm. The property lot is 3,315 square feet, while the house is 1,120 square feet. The front is exquisite, with ceiling-to-floor Victorian windows, with fancy window dressings on the top of each window, with lovely dentiles along the top near the roof. Inside, there are high ceilings, hardwood floors, original mantels, but fireplaces are blocked off, and a separate courtyard. It is a single story, 2-bedroom, 2 baths, with the living room in the center, with the kitchen and dining room located at the back of the house. It has a small backyard and a small side yard. While this isn't the original house, it was rebuilt on the same foundations as the original house, which means it basically has the same house room plan. It is said that around 1875, Marie Laveau stayed almost exclusively in the home, where she died 6 years later. But that was just where the story begins, because even though she passed away, she would still be witnessed in the streets of New Orleans. The home is very close to Louis Armstrong Park, which is also known as Congo Square, where Marie Laveau would consistently hold voodoo rituals and events. Some say that it was Marie Laveau II, Marie Laveau's daughter, who is said to have had later changed her name to match her mother's, who began practicing again after her mother passed away, while others said it was her daughter acting as a reincarnation of the previous Marie Laveau. Developers tore down the original home of Marie Laveau to the foundation in 1903. They built the new home on the same foundation, which leads many to believe it still contains energies from Marie Laveau. The house has been a vacation rental at times, and several guests claim to have seen the ghost of Marie Laveau wearing a long white dress and a headdress. People have claimed to hear the sounds of chanting, drumming, and other paranormal activities within the confines of the home. Years ago, a couple decided to come to New Orleans for a relaxing vacation and thought it would be interesting to stay at the site of the old Laveau house. After touring the French Quarters for a while, they returned to the house for the night. Later, sounds of chanting and even drumming cut through the silent night, and the couple wrongfully assumed the noise was coming from outside. The husband checked outside to find nothing but the dead of night. Curious, he walked around the block and towards the park, but still found nothing but silence. When he entered back into the house, he came to the realization that the sound of chanting and drums was coming from the living room. The couple, unnerved by this strangely eerie experience, decided they were not going to sleep there that night and promptly packed their bags and left. Upon returning the following morning, they walked to the center of the living room, where the wife noticed a single, pristine feather laying on the floor. The couple checked all the windows in the house, but they were all locked shut. Needless to say, they left for good and never returned. A single pristine feather was Marie Laveau's signature object and is considered to be a great magical item among voodoo practitioners. Feathers are believed to bring the one who discovered it great luck. On the other hand, if it had been discovered on one's pillow, it is said that the feather will bring you grave sickness or even death. According to legend, this ritual involves the placing of a chicken's head into the victim's pillow, and as time goes by, the hex takes hold, producing a single feather on top of said pillow. One man recounted his stay at the house, recalling that he had just woken up from a nap when his gaze landed on a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room, glaring at him. Another account comes from another visitor of Marie Laveau's house. She remembered waking one morning on her second night at the house, and suddenly she became frightened as she was physically unable to get up, as if someone was holding her down. Luckily for these two individuals, they did not find a feather on their pillow. One infamous ghostly encounter took place during the Great Depression. As the story goes, a homeless man fell asleep on the top of a tomb in the cemetery, but shortly after falling asleep, he suddenly awoke to the banging of drums and eerie chanting. He happened upon the tomb of Marie, where he encountered the ghosts of nude men and women dancing around the tomb. In the center, it was Marie and her boa zombie. A man named Elmore Banks had another experience near St. Louis Cemetery, number 1. In the mid-1930s, when an old woman came into the drugstore where he was a customer. For some reason, she left the shop owner feeling frightened as he quickly proceeded to run off to the back of the store. The woman laughingly asks Elmore Banks,
Do you know me?
to which Banks replied,
No, ma'am.
The woman, angered by his answer, slapped him across the face, and then jumped up in the air and levitated out the door and over the top of the telephone wires. When she passed over the graveyard wall to St. Louis Cemetery number 1, she vanished into thin air. As you might imagine, Banks was terrified, and the sight of a levitating woman left him passed out cold. He was revived by the shop owner, who gave him whiskey and informed him
That was Marie Laveau.
after Marie died in 1881, the Queen's look-alike daughter, Marie Eucharist Glapion, also known to many as Marie Laveau II, followed in her mother's footsteps and took over the family business. Marie, too, looked so much like her mother that people in the city who saw her thought that the Queen had been resurrected from the dead. Maybe, they said in hushed whispers, Marie Laveau was even immortal. Naturally, they wondered why she appeared so much younger with the vigor of her youthful days. There was an actual rumor at the time that Marie Laveau consumed the souls of her fellow New Orleans to regain her youthfulness. Marie, too, always the cunning businesswoman like her mother, didn't mind the attention or the free publicity. But Marie, too, unlike her mother, was rumored to embrace the darker side of voodoo. She was known to throw extremely wild rituals around New Orleans. She capitalized on her mother's success and grew her audience. Celebrations on Bayou St. John became the perfect venue for Marie, too, to perform. as we like to do, we went to the internet for everyday people's reviews of any paranormal activity happening there today. However, these days, it is a shop called Marie Laveau's House of Voodoo, and seems to be a well-known and well-loved part of the area. People travel from all around to see the spot where Voodoo Queen of New Orleans' home once stood. While there aren't any online reviews to read about, one can only imagine what might occur inside the building, especially when no one is around. The thing to remember with the story of Marie Laveau is that most of the stories come from tales passed down from generation to generation in New Orleans. While some are most likely true, some are most definitely over-exaggerated versions told by people who might have caught a glimpse of a late-night ritual. In a lot of stories, her birth date changes, and her death date as well. In some versions, it's her daughter, Marie Laveau II, who is the Voodoo Queen. Some tales make her out to be a local hero, and others a dark, malevolent figure hell-bent on having power of the city. So your guess is as good as any. But one thing is for sure, Marie Laveau did once live, and she was most definitely revered as being the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, a title she earned for better or worse, and one, it seems, she isn't willing to give up anytime soon, not even 150 years after her death.
And that's what I was saying, that depending on where you read and where you look, the story changes so drastically that it could be her or her daughter. Sometimes they cite her daughter's birth date and death date. Sometimes it's her. Sometimes they say it's her grandmother. I've read stories that say she practiced voodoo out of the city. So nothing in the story is ever 100% with the story.
I feel like everything maybe is just so intertwined, and maybe that the voodoo culture at the time was kind of looked at kind of side-eyed, and everybody's just kind of throwing every little thing that they know out there.
Well, I mean, that's definitely, but there was no record keeping. Mm-hmm. There was no good record keeping. There was record keeping, but unfortunately for a lot of the African American, population, it wasn't very good.
Right.
Probably for 100 years after this.
So long. Too long.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just hard to say what is fact and what is fiction in this, but no matter which way you spin the story, it's an interesting story regardless.
Absolutely.
Even if she was a hairdresser who just did voodoo at home, it's still a cool story.
Yeah.
And she was most definitely the voodoo queen, either her or her daughter. Just depends. More times than not, I found it to be Marie Laveau, not her daughter. But I do know that her daughter did follow in her footsteps. But when we speak about the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, I'm almost 100% positive it's Marie Laveau, not her daughter.
It's Mama Marie.
Yes, it's Marie 1. So
weird.
Unfortunately, there's no EVPs to listen to. The house was rebuilt in 1903, and it's been a shop for a really long time. I'm not even 100% sure as to when it was a vacation rental. I couldn't figure out that date. So there's nobody going in there overnight now. I mean, because people would be lined up around the city waiting for their turn to get into a spot like this.
Absolutely.
I really feel like stuff probably happens here when, we'll just do this now. We'll do this now.
Okay.
Is it real?
I have to ask you, after hearing the story, what do you think? Do you think there's something to this?
I do. I really, really do. I think that when you I think the practice of any kind of religion really behind something, especially something like voodoo, where there's kind of spells and the chanting and like just the certain type of things that come along with it. I mean, you can put a chicken head on a pillow and make somebody, just those kinds of things. I think that brings a lot of energy to a place. And I feel like, especially those things being so prominent and so fully believed in, that belief and that energy just seeps into everywhere around it.
Yeah.
So I absolutely, yes, 100% believe that.
Okay.
So what about you?
I think it is too, actually. I think there's something going on here. Even though we have no like modern day evidence, there's some. New Orleans itself is just known as being just a very paranormal hotspot. And I do believe it is tied to voodoo, which I am not a religious person at all. I don't believe in any kind of religion. But there is something about voodoo that has always really freaked me out. And I'm sure it's because, during times like this, people focused on the bad stuff. But it's this kind of thing to me that in my life has always been like this. You don't play with it. You just don't mess with voodoo for a reason. And that's not to say it's bad. It's inherently evil or anything. I just think it's something that without a proper understanding, it's just something you don't mess with. And I think that it goes against everything that I believe in to say this, but I do believe there is something about voodoo that we don't understand, that there is some power to this. I don't know if that means, religions work or are real or magic is real, but I do think there is something in voodoo that works. There have been so many weird claims about voodoo. There are the strangest videos, and they come up with these weird concoctions, and I don't know. I do believe something's happening here, and I do believe it is because of Marie Laveau. And literally, it goes against everything that I believe in.
It does.
But there is just something about it. So that means this week, Marie Laveau, I mean, I just feel like it goes without saying, but she's going to get
The big old seal of approval.
which is going to bring us into next week, which I'm going to break the thing I usually do. We're going to be talking about the cemetery where Marie Laveau is buried.
Ooh.
Because there are a lot of stories about the St. Louis Cemetery, number one. And this is the one you picture in your head when you think of a cemetery in Louisiana.
Yeah.
It's that one.
Okay.
Okay. There's many, many, many cemeteries in Louisiana. But when you get the picture of a Louisiana cemetery in your head, this is the one that you're thinking of. It's those rows of, catacombs and stuff like that. It's that one. Because this place is so well known and so many people have stories of just weird things happening there. So we're going to talk about that next week on our Marie Laveau two-parter. And
Not Marie Laveau 2, like her daughter.
Well, it
but
could
like
be.
Mama Marie number 2.
It could be. I don't know. I just know that I'm pretty sure that we do know for a fact that Marie Laveau, the original Marie Laveau, is the one buried in the cemetery. So I don't know. I'm never going to be able to give you an answer unless, some records come about, but we're going to do the cemetery.
I'm excited. That's super cool.
It's going to be a cool one. But where can they find us?
They can find us on Instagram at forthebooze_podcast and on Facebook at forthebooze.
You can also find us on Twitter at forthebooze, X, whatever you want to call it. You can also find us on YouTube for the booze. Still working on the whole YouTube channel thing. If you have any experience with videos and how to do them on especially OBS, because that's what I'm trying to use, and reach out to us at forthebooze12@gmail.com and talk to me because I could use the help. And also, if you have a listener story or suggestion that you would like to throw at the show, send it to the same place, forthebooze12@gmail.com. And please, 5 stars, rate and review. And I'm also thinking about starting a Patreon.
Ooh.
We've been doing this for 2 years.
Yeah.
We've dropped a lot of our own money into doing this show. And it would be a nice way that if you like the show, we're not going to tell everybody they need to do this, right? Because you don't have to. The show's free, no matter how you look at it.
Absolutely.
But if you'd like to help the show, be on the lookout. I think we're going to make a Patreon for anybody who wants to help us out, take this a little farther. We'd like to do merch or something one day and stuff like that. So
we would. And maybe, I don't know. Maybe we could do some extra content or something,
Well, I
little
mean, yeah, if we're going to do
special
Patreon.
videos and stuff.
If we're going to do Patreon, maybe we can work it out to where when we do videos and stuff, maybe we can give everybody early access to those videos. And maybe we'll do like an extra little podcast or something.
Yeah.
We'll come up with something. So there's all that. And I guess this is where we're going to end it.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, so much for listening. And we will see you in the next one.
Bye. Watch out for them feathers on your pillow and keep your chickens safe.